And so I think for the Eagles, with a smart GM in Howie Roseman, when you're picking that high, pick the player that is playing the most valuable position on the field. That's quarterback, and let Fields and Jalen Hurts battle it out.
You have no idea what you've done here. You have saved just a tailspin of a conversation, and you pulled Jason Martinez, one of our co-hosts, out of it. So
thank God.
First and foremost, Chris Trapasso joining us at Chris Trapasso on Twitter. And you can read him, CBS Sports, all things for the NFL draft as well at CBS Sports, and Blue Wire Pods as well, the Prospect Podcast. So I'm Eitan Shander. You can see Barrett Brooks, Harry Mays, Jason Martinez. Chris, first and foremost, thank you, sir, for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. And this is fun to be a part of this big panel here to talk about the Eagles draft.
No combined IQ of $180.
Don't expect any insightful comments except from the former player.
Right.
I want to thank Chris, too, personally, for pulling us out of a boring hockey rabbit hole.
It was bad, Chris. It was rough. Jason's our hockey guy, works with the Flyers and is a lifer, and he sensed an opening and was dragging us into it. That's all.
Sucking us down, man. It's sucking us down, man. But of course, you know the situation here. You know the situation here in Philadelphia. Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts. We don't know if you can fix Carson, if we want to fix Carson, if we want to go Hurts, And lo and behold, you suck us down your own rabbit hole, and we're going with Ohio State's quarterback, man. How do you get to that assumption?
Well, first off, I have to say there is a caveat with this. I do a mock draft every single week for CBS Sports. So just giving the Eagles Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith was kind of getting a little bit old. Yeah, it's too boring. So, but I didn't just throw that pick in there willy-nilly. I think if you look at where the Eagles are, I do think Carson Wentz will be on a different team next year. That ship has kind of sailed. I think after Doug Peterson was fired, I think that was kind of the biggest indication that Carson Wentz, and then everything that's come out of that Wentz has said in the locker room, in the film room. So I don't know if the Eagles are going to hitch their wagon to Jalen Hurts. He only had a completion percentage of 52 this past season, 2 back-to-back 300-yard games against the Cardinals and the Cowboys. But I think he has a long way to go as a passer, and a team that's about $50 million over the cap. I think they're a little bit closer to rebuilding than they are to truly be Super Bowl contenders. They don't expect to be picking in the top 10. It doesn't happen very often. So I think for the Eagles, with a smart GM in Howie Roseman, when you're picking that high, pick the player that is playing the most valuable position on the field. That's quarterback, and let Fields and Jalen Hurts battle it out. Whoever loses, you either keep Justin Fields, or if he wins, you ship off Jalen Hurts, or keep him as that sub-package player in 2021.
Damn it, Chris, you're making too much sense.
Well, except for one part about the smart thing about the GM. This GM, his draft history, Chris, isn't littered with great picks. And drafting 6, and we know how they ended up drafting there with basically tanking that last game, putting Nate Sudfeld in. Where are the kind of the tiers of this draft? Where's the first drop off? Where's the second drop off? Because what people want to know is, can Howie possibly screw up 6?
Well, I think that's a good point. That last tanking game where Jalen Hurts wasn't necessarily playing very well, 7 of 20 for only like 72 yards with an interception. I think that was an indication to me that they were trying to get as high as they could to pick a quarterback with Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and Zach Wilson. I think those are the quarterbacks that are concrete inside the top 10. After that, I think there's a pretty big fall and a drop-off. You have Trey Lance from North Dakota State, only played 1 game this season, only had 1 year as a full-time starter at a lesser or a small school level, played lesser competition. There's Mac Jones. He's not really exciting in terms of his athleticism. So you want to be picking like probably inside the top 7 or 8, I think, with the Lions sitting there and the Panthers sitting right behind them. If they don't pick a quarterback, Justin Fields would ultimately be off the board. It does open up for the possibility of a wide receiver too. I think Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase, the 2 SEC receivers, are the cream of the crop. Jalen Waddle too from Alabama. Those 3 wide receivers and those 3 quarterbacks, I think, are like entrenched inside the top 12 of the 2021 draft.
All right, so with this pick of Justin Fields, you have Carson Wentz being moved. Now, that's not that easy to do. I think that would take some of Carson Wentz's camp to do something to help accommodate that trade. Where do you think, are you linking the dots with Frank Reich, or is there some other place that you think might be a landing spot for Wentz?
Yeah, I've tried not to overthink this too much. I think, like you just mentioned, for Carson Wentz and his team to kind of accommodate what needs to happen for a trade to actually go down, I think he would love to go to Indianapolis, rejoin Frank Reich behind that good offensive line. They need to add some weapons, but I think, moving conferences too, I think that's the spot where Carson Wentz will ultimately go. It'll be interesting to see, too, what the Eagles could get in return for someone that 3 years ago was an MVP candidate, has dealt with injuries, and then arguably at times this past season was like the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. Like, can they get a second rounder, a third rounder? It will be interesting to see, but I think you can connect the dots to a lot of other places. There's so many quarterback needy teams, but I think he'll land up with the Indianapolis Colts.
Chris, I'm curious, when you just scan across the draft board and doing this once a week for CBS, and again, Chris Trapasso is on Twitter, at Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports, the Prospect podcast on Blue Wire Pods. How likely is it? Because it seems more and more likely by the day that a scenario could play out where 2 or maybe 3 of those quarterbacks, before you reach that line, off the board, the 2 wide receivers could be off the board as well. And there isn't something smacking Howie Roseman dead in the face and saying, hey, go ahead, draft this young man. That's where I think a lot of others believe he is a lock to trade back. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think based on that scenario that you just kind of laid out, that if they don't love Justin Fields, or if those 3 quarterbacks are already gone by pick 6, and maybe the top 5 is 3 quarterbacks and 2 wide receivers, at that point, I think it would make sense for the Eagles to start fielding trade offers. That there'll probably be a team that would love to pick Justin Fields that's picking later, closer to the back end of the top 10 or outside of the top 10. Because like I said at the beginning, I would like a trade down because the Eagles, I think, are further away from contending than I think a lot of their fans probably want to accept right now. Trading down, getting more picks, getting cheap talent, young talent onto this roster is really what this team needs.
Well, I like your assessment of Patrick Surtain. I've been screaming his name for the past couple of weeks of being, one of the top DBs in this draft. And that's actually the direction I want the Eagles to go. But, what value, in your evaluation, what made him the best DB you saw on the board?
Just because he has the NFL bloodlines, obviously, with his dad playing in the NFL, and that there are stories that have come out that his dad was teaching him cornerback technique when he was like 5 years old. The fact that he's big, physical, and I think he's a pretty good athlete for his size. A lot of these bigger corners, when they're dealing with these smaller and shifty wide receivers, they kind of get lost at the line of scrimmage. I think Surtain has a good blend of using his hands, and he has the hips and the fluidity to stay with those wide receivers. If the Eagles do need a corner, which they do, I think he would be certainly in play at number 6. Would he move the needle a ton? I just don't think so. For a team that I'm not used to seeing inside the top 10 in the Eagles picking this high, I think you go with the absolute highest value position, quarterback, wide receiver. I think corner's up there too, and they've needed some more young cornerback help for a long time. So Surtain's probably the dark horse selection to be there at number 6.
Hey, Chris, when you look at the NFL, I have a rule about the NFL draft in the first 2 rounds. Never pick a player when there's a player from an SEC school, ACC, or Big Ten that comes from a school that's more known for academics or their basketball team.
So you wouldn't have taken Wilford Montgomery at Abilene Christian?
No, I wouldn't have, because that's my rule. Now, there's outliers like Zach Ertz from Stanford, and there's other outliers, obviously. But when you look at the big schools, the big programs, especially this year where so many college games were canceled, do you expect to see just more players of volume going out in the draft and taken from the bigger name schools because of that element of it? And because they don't have as much data this year as they normally would in a draft year.
Yeah, I think to your point, first off, that's a pretty funny kind of philosophy to have. And it probably, if you look at it, it's probably true. You want to pick players from schools that are known for their football programs, not for, how high the GPAs are of all the players coming out or how good they are on the hardwood. I think for the opt-out players in particular, we're going to see a lot of those players fall down the draft because they're just kind of out of sight, out of mind. And like you said, There's just not the film from 2020. We're not getting a combine. So those pro day numbers that always get fudged, that's going to be the main vertical and broad jump and 3-cone drill that we're going to see. So it's definitely going to be, like it's been for the past year with everything, an unprecedented draft, because we did have the combine last year and then things kind of got crazy. But this year, I think there'll be a lot more draft boards that have drastically different players, within the top 32 or inside a top 50.
Well, one of the things that we've been burying here, because we're so Eagle-centric, is that part of the other big part of your mock draft is the trades above the Eagles. Deshaun Watson going to the Jets, and of course the Houston Texans moving on with a new quarterback. They get the guy out of BYU, according to you. But Matthew Stafford going to the Washington football team with some sort of a trade. You put Matthew Stafford with that defense and some of the other players that they have, that could be a serious football team going forward if that trade were to be made.
Well, yeah, I mean, just before I came on here, we've seen so many reports on Twitter from Adam Schefter that Deshaun Watson officially asked for a trade from the Houston Texans. So it's a fun first day on the job for their new head coach, David Culley. So I think that trade ultimately goes down, whether it's the New York Jets. They have more ammunition, 2 first-rounders this year, 2 first-rounders next year, or it's the Dolphins. That was originally the team that Deshaun Watson said he wanted to go with. They have 2 first-rounders this year, of course. I think that ultimately goes down. Matthew Stafford, though, I think to your point, if you add him to that team, and the new Washington football GM, Martin Mayhew, was the GM in Detroit who drafted Matthew Stafford in 2009, his first ever draft pick as a GM. That was me kind of connecting the dots there. I try not to overthink that one either. It'll probably just take a first-round selection. And again, tying that back to the Eagles, I wonder what Carson Wentz will be able to fetch. If he can get a second or a third-round pick, I think that would be a great compensation for a player that's really fallen off a cliff.
Chris, thank you so much, man. Appreciate the time, and we look forward to
Thanks, Chris.
the next one next week.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you.
Thanks,
man.
Chris.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Chris Trapasso joining us again. CBS Sports. Take a quick one. Wrap the hour coming up next on the network. It's The Middle, phillyvoice.com/the